You guys keep on scooting down. I mean, not you guys.
No.
Thank you so much for coming today, and also thank you for this is also being streamed, so there's a large number of media contingencies around the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that have the opportunity to watch this. Today, you're going to hear about transparency and accountability in our state-related institutions. You'll find out, just as you've seen from some of the information before, this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is a good government issue. This is about looking out for taxpayers. This is about looking out for faculty and staff. This is about looking out for students, and this is about looking out for alumni. Today, we're going to hear from the three pieces of legislation that are included in this package for state-related universities. Representative Christiana and Representative Maher also have components of this bill. Also here from the Auditor General, Eugene D. Pasquale. Thank you so much for coming. Anthony Labrano from the Penn State Board of Trustees, and Mary Beth Schmidt from Penn Staters for Responsible Stewardship. I'll also have two statements that I'll read, one from Jay Paterno, current member of the Board of Trustees, and one from Franco Harris, a great advocate for state-related universities and education as a whole here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I'm going to turn it over, and I'll introduce each individual member. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Christiana, who's going to talk about his component of this three-bill package. Representative?
Good morning. Thank you, Aaron. And Aaron, thank you for your leadership. One of the quintessential ingredients to good government and responsible government are transparency and accountability to its citizens. Backroom deals and wasteful spending and corruption of the past, they've eaten away at the trust that people once had in their government and in our big institutions. So in 2011, Penn Watch gave the taxpayers online access to the entire state budget. Then in 2015, School Watch gave the citizens of Pennsylvania and the media access to spending habits in our public schools in Pennsylvania. The more transparency the public gets and the media gets, the more they want. And who are we to stand in the way? We should continually build upon this, the transparency success that we've delivered here in Harrisburg, and we should continue in our pursuit of allowing taxpayers to see where every dollar of their hard-earned money is invested. Like our state-owned schools, these universities receive a tremendous amount of tax dollars. Taxpayers deserve to know that their money is being used for the right reasons. So my proposal would subject members of the Board of Trustees and other employees at the state-related universities who are responsible for recommending official action to the requirements of the Pennsylvania Ethics Act. This would require these individuals to file statements of financial interest, just like the employees of the state system of higher education, just like the members of the legislature. Over the past decade, we have raised the standard of transparency on behalf of the taxpayers. It's time for our state-related universities, which receive more than $560 million, to be held to the same standard. A lot of the transparency measures in the past have been a product of bad decision-making. We started with ourselves by members of the legislature voluntarily posting our expenses online. And then we took it to the state budget to provide transparency. I think we need to continually expand transparency measures in Pennsylvania, and I'm thankful for Representative Bernstine's leadership, Chairman Maher's leadership, and all of those who are up here to continue to deliver more transparency to the citizens of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Christiana. Representative John Maher from the 40th Legislative District will be talking about his piece of the legislation. Representative, thank you.
21 years I've now served in this House of Representatives. During my first full term, I was young enough, foolish enough to disregard those that told me that advances in the transparency of Pennsylvania and local government was impossible. At that point, we had not had any progress in something close to 50 years. For good reason, because a lot of people are fans of darkness and shadows. But we got it done with Open Records 1. Some years later, we had Open Records 2. Then we've had Penn Watch and School Watch. Now, some say, well, why are the state-related universities not already part of the Open Records Law? Well, in fact, they are, to a point. There are unnumbered thousands of nonprofit entities in Pennsylvania which receive taxpayer dollars directly or indirectly. Nobody even knows how many thousands there are. But only 4 of them have been singled out for any participation in the Open Records Law, which are the state-related universities. And they have a special relationship with the Commonwealth. So they are included, they are the exception among all the nonprofits that receive money in Pennsylvania for being included in the Open Records Law. But it's become clear over time that the interests of the public would be better served by expanding their obligations under that law. And the legislation that I'll be introducing will greatly expand their obligations for making information public. But we need to be mindful that they have missions beyond a government function. They're great research institutions. They serve many other purposes. So we need to expand the public's right to know without impairing their missions. And I think we found a good balance to accomplish that. I want to thank Representative Bernstine for taking the lead on this transparency endeavor. Representative Christiana did so much with Penn Watch and School Watch. This is my final term, and I look at this as some unfinished business, and I very much want to see us get it accomplished this year. Thank you.
Thank you. The next gentleman who I'd like to introduce is the Auditor General from Pennsylvania, Representative Eugene D. Pasquale. And I would share with you his reports that were written were really a basis of what this legislation came from. This is an Auditor General who has taken the bull by the horns and isn't afraid to go in and shake up the status quo. And I thank you, General, for your leadership on this and your guidance as we've worked on this for the previous several months. So, General, thank you so much for coming today.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, and I want to commend Representatives Maher and Christiana also for being here. Couple items. Representative Maher outlined, he didn't give the timeline, but he deserves a lot of credit for this. In 2002, the Open Records 1, which had been about 50 years in the making, along with Senator Jubileer shepherding that through in the Senate in 2002, made a big step forward. There was still some unfinished work, and when about 50 new legislators came into town in 2007, I was fortunate to be one of them. We passed bipartisan legislation in the House and the Senate that removed a whole host of other exemptions, including the General Assembly. But there were 4 institutions that still somehow were exempted, and I still shake my head as to how the General Assembly was willing to make themselves subject to the state's right to know law and somehow still allow our 4 great state-related institutions to remain exempt. I introduced legislation in about 2008, 2009 to remove that exemption. That legislation went nowhere. Hopefully, this is a sign of some progress that can be made. A couple quick points. Number one is our 4 state-related institutions are some of the best institutions in the entire world. And Representative Maher is correct. We do need to find the right balance to make sure that appropriate research is protected, while at the same time making sure that taxpayer dollars are protected. Representative Christiana is correct, and that is making sure that Board of Trustees and other appropriate officials are subject to the state's Ethics Act. There are, in some cases, you could argue billions of dollars over the course of the last decade of taxpayer dollars that have flown through Penn State, Pitt, Temple, and Lincoln. And I say that that's a good thing, But still, when you're doing the contracts, I've found school districts in some of our audits doing inappropriate contracts with swimming pools. So when you're talking about tens of millions of dollars in construction contracts, we need to make sure that, especially when it's taxpayer dollars and it's a public institution, that the people awarding those contracts are doing the same financial interest disclosures that elected officials and people in other public boards are doing. And my audits of Pitt and Penn State so far, and we'll certainly get to Temple and Lincoln, outline A, what great institutions there are, but B, there are gaps to make sure that they can be even better. And, I want to, this may seem silly for some, but I want to point this out too, because sometimes as a Pitt guy, I get, on Facebook, somebody will say, you're just doing this because of, anti-Penn State bias. Well, no, this A applies to all of them. But B, I know this will seem silly to some, but I want to point this out. This is not about football recruiting. Aaron Rodgers went to Cal Berkeley, subject to the state's right to know law. I think it has not impacted his career with the Packers. Eli Manning went to Mississippi, subject to the Mississippi Right to Know Act. Peyton Manning went to Tennessee, subject to the state's Right to Know Act. This is not about football recruiting. This is not about athletics. It's not about attack on any one institution. This is about making sure our four great state-related universities can become even greater. And I believe if the boards of these institutions are subject to the right to know law and financial interest disclosures, and that the appropriate balance is found on protecting research, protecting medicine, protecting patients that are part of these institutions, while at the same time making sure taxpayer dollars are spent appropriately, I think that these great institutions can go to even greater heights. Hopefully our audits of Pitt and Penn State can help lead the way to that. I commend Representative Bernstine for his leadership on this, and for members of the board and Representative Christiana and Maher for standing here with us, as we clearly, this shows, I think, that this is a bipartisan approach. There is no ideology on openness and transparency, and hopefully this can lead away to the final piece to the puzzle to making sure that Pennsylvania, where we were maybe late 90s, which was the dark ages on openness, to now the final piece to the puzzle to make sure that we are an open and transparent state government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I'm going to also introduce at this point in time Anthony Lebrano, Penn State Board of Trustees member. Thank you, Anthony.
Good morning. As Aaron said, my name is Anthony Lebrano, and I'm an alumni elected trustee at Penn State, having first been elected July 2012. What we have before us today is the opportunity to create the gold standard in governance at Penn State. With the enactment of this legislation, we give the hardworking taxpayers of Pennsylvania just that. They deserve no less than to have its flagship university utilizing such a standard. Since its founding in 1855, Penn State has received more than $12 billion in state appropriations from these hardworking taxpayers of Pennsylvania. Last year alone, the university received some $300 million. For this support, Penn State has a moral obligation to hold itself accountable to the very people the university is supposed to serve. That is the mission of Penn State, to provide an affordable education to those hardworking citizens of the Commonwealth. The measures proposed today will help achieve the worthy objectives of openness, transparency, and most of all, accountability. So I stand before you, along with 11 other board colleagues, in support of these three bills. And I would like to acknowledge here with us today are some of my colleagues. Senator Bob Jubileer, Bill Olsey, behind him is Bob Capretto, Dr. Robert Capretto. Elliot Weinstein is here somewhere. Rob Tribeck. We also have a candidate for the Board of Trustees, Alvin DeLevy, here too. This is a very, very important issue to me as a Penn State alum. When I joined the Penn State Board, it was on the premise of openness, transparency, and accountability. The time has long since come for us to work to achieve those objectives and not to fall prey to business as usual. With the scarcity of resources available in the state today, it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that the hardworking taxpayers of Pennsylvania are guaranteed that their funds are being used wisely. I want to thank Representative Bernstine for taking the lead on this. Leadership is what's required in order for this to occur. Thank you.
Thank you. And last and absolutely not least, I would like to introduce Mary Beth Schmidt, the Executive Director for Penn Staters for Responsible Stewardship. Her organization represents 50,000 alumni for the Pennsylvania State University.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here today on behalf of Penn Staters for Responsible Stewardship. I can tell you that in our grassroots advocacy group of more than 50,000, we are Penn State in all of its dimensions. We range in age, profession, and economic level. Many of us are alumni or Penn State parents. Some claim multiple alums in our families over a few generations. We are scientists and technologists, teachers, nurses, bankers, doctors, lawyers, and homemakers. We are entrepreneurs and factory workers, artists, writers, and musicians. Some of us are even Hall of Fame athletes. We are your next door neighbors, certainly throughout Pennsylvania, but also in all 50 states and in many countries throughout the world. What we all have in common is that we've been advocating constantly and consistently for improved governance at Penn State for nearly 7 full years. At board meetings, in trustee elections, which happened to kick off today, in social and mainstream media, and here in Harrisburg. We all want to be confident that Penn State is operating honestly, ethically, and transparently. This proposed legislation, we believe, is a thoughtful and positive step in that direction. Representatives Bernstine, Maher, and Christiana, thank you for not only hearing our concerns, but more importantly, for acting upon them. You can rest assured that you have our support as you navigate the next phase of the legislative process in pursuit of improved governance that is in the best interest of Penn State in all of its dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I would also like to read 2 statements today. Unfortunately, Jay Paterno was unable to make it last minute due to a conflict that came up in his schedule. So I'm going to read that, and this will also be in the media packets that are handed out. And it says, "Please accept my apologies for not being here in person in support of this legislative effort. The efforts being undertaken today are a step toward Penn State's stated goals of greater transparency and good governance. Being mindful of the significant investment of the Commonwealth makes to our university, we have a fiscal responsibility for the tax and tuition dollars of Pennsylvania citizens, our students, and their families. To that end, a reform to our governance structure is in the best interests of the school, the students, faculty, staff, and alumni. Along with many others, we call for the state legislature to take up this effort, which will benefit our university and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Jay Paterno, member of the Board of Trustees." Additionally, Franco Harris had another conflict that came up today, and I'd also like to read that, which will also be in your media packets. "I would like to thank State Reps Aaron Bernstine, Jim Christiana, and John Maher for taking a stand today. I stand with you in support of greater transparency and accountability from our state-related institutions of higher learning. Too often, these institutions hold tight to the culture of secrecy and lack of accountability, and we have no way of knowing if they are serving us well or not. It is time to sound the alarm and open these boards to the same standards and oversight as smaller institutions in our state. Change like this can only happen with help from the Pennsylvania legislature. To those who serve us, I say the fate of our right to know is in your hands. You are our leaders. In this great state of Pennsylvania, we are asking for your help. The taxpayers, students, alumni, donors, and educators of Pennsylvania are asking for your help. Today, we stand together for transparency and accountability. Thank you, Franco Harris. At that point, I'd like to take your questions, and I know that if they're also specific to the pieces of legislation that Representative Christiana and Representative Maher have, I'm sure that they'd be willing to take those as well. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have at this time. Yes, sir.
How's the rest? I mean, there's like 65 members, I think, of the Board of Trustees at Penn State. How are the rest feeling on this topic?
So, and I'll just repeat the question, that way folks at home can hear it if that's okay. The gentleman asked, that you said there were 65 members of the board. Yeah, I got it. So yeah, but there are 36 members, and he asked if we had received feedback from any of the other folks. I'd share with you that I think when we talk about the governance structure of the Board of Trustees, the greatest, the individuals, which is my component of the bill, by the way, the individuals that have the greatest at stake in a university are those that walk around with that name on their degree for the remainder of their lives. And a lot of those, by the way, end up being faculty and staff of the university. So what our focus has been on this piece of legislation is increasing the percentage of the alumni voice with this, and also we're also increasing the percentage of the student voice. With nine alumni, which would be out of 21 members instead of out of 36. And also, as a reminder, these were recommendations that were by the Auditor General, Dee Pasquale, as well as the Auditor General Wagner. So this is really taking, this is about protecting taxpayers and making sure that a good governance structure is in place. Other questions? Yes, sir.
One about the open records law changes. Sure. I was wondering if I could hear a little more detail about how you try to find that sweet spot between protecting, nuclear physics research secrets or nanotechnology research secrets, but, making Penn State's books more of an open record, Pitt's books more of an open record. How do you do that?
Charlie, it's a very difficult process to sort out. You framed it well. And consequently, there's been many of us, members of the legislature, auditor generals, people who are with these variety of universities. And I should mention, I'm actually a trustee for the University of Pittsburgh as well. And we've been working and trying to sort that question out as best we can. So the legislation itself will be pretty specific about the expansive increase in the obligations of these universities, but less subject to vagueness to be discovered later. I think it's pretty important that we be as concrete as possible just to address that question once and for all, so it doesn't become an ongoing soap opera at the Office of Open Records.
Is the bill introduced yet?
No,
or
it's
is it
not.
still in the drafting phase?
We're still polishing it up. And if anybody has any brilliant ideas they wish to share with me, the in-basket is still open.
Well, one thing I'm curious about, would you be going for, one frustration some of us have had has been sort of like trying to track, and this is a Penn State specific question, sorry for those of you up there on Penn State, but just for example, last year Penn State reached that settlement with the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Insurance Corporation on the question of how much reimbursement was the university going to get for the Sandusky civil settlement payments. And then we were all waiting for the audit to come out, and we thought we could kind of get an answer to that. And the audit had such a muddy picture that it was difficult to tell. That's an example of something that you would like to clean up, perhaps? Would you say that for example, future civil settlements would be covered by it?
Whenever you're dealing with civil settlements, we also need to keep in mind the rights of the other party. And often when there are sealed settlements, it's to protect the other party. And it is a tortured question to balance the public's right to know with the privacy rights of an individual who was apparently harmed. And so I don't know that all will be satisfied with the conclusions that would come forth in the legislation. It is something we're mindful of, but understand it's a razor's edge kind of a question that, you know, I think I've been about transparency since I first sought to serve, but I also am mindful that our appetite for information shouldn't be used to harm the innocent, and there's that balance. So, but if you've got a particular suggestion on that, please send me what your solution would be, and I'm all ears.
Do you have anything specifically, like you said the legislation's still getting drafted, but do you have anything that's already in there in terms of documents that a right to know request could get?
That's correct. Yeah.
Can you give an example?
Oh my gosh, it's a very, very long list.
Like with salaries, like does it go out to like 175 salary, like any salary? Is that open?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a long list of information. And again, my goal is to be as specific as possible so that we don't need to double the size of the Office of Open Records to handle inquiries.
One for Representative Bernstine.
Yes, sir.
You have legislation here addressing the size of the Penn State Board. I wonder, is anybody looking at the size of the Pitt Board or the Temple Board?
Sure.
And is there possible legislation to follow on that?
Yeah, and once again, I'll just repeat the question so folks at home can hear. The question was, your current focus is on the Penn State Board of Trustees and governance and restructuring. Is this something that you'll look at for the other state-related universities? The answer is yes. So the Auditor General came back with and looked at the Board of Trustees other state-related institutions. I think that's something that's on the table. Legislatively, the way that things are structured, you can really only address one of those issues at a time. And I've seen in my conversations with members of the Board of Trustees at each of those 4 universities that the greatest governance issue and the issues that we've seen, as well as the largest, obviously Penn State's the largest of the state-related institutions, is the Pennsylvania State University. So that's why we've chosen to address that first. But I think when you're talking about transparency and when you're talking about improving governance with organizations that receive a lot of money, without a doubt, everything's on the table. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
With Representative Christiana, with your ethics bill, like, do you know, like, is there a mechanism there in case something comes back from a financial disclosure statement that like raises question marks with regulators on like, oh, you made this decision and you had a huge conflict of interest there? Is there any mechanism to go back and try and enforce something?
Well, one of the great things about transparency measures is that it changes behaviors. When decision makers know that their decisions are going to be made public and be transparent, it changes behaviors. That's why I think it's tough to track the successes of transparency measures, because merely presenting the information in an easy-to-find location and an easy-to-find way changes people's decisions. And so I'm sure there will be plenty of discussion about the stick, so to speak, and what you're asking about is the stick for poor decision-making. Our hope is that by improving transparency, we will eliminate the need to have to resort to corrective action. And this is the important first step. the pursuit of transparency is a long process. And I think one thing that you hear up here today is our desire to improve it and to take it further. I'm sure there'll be subsequent conversations for a long time afterwards. But the first major and most important step is to make this information public, and rest assured that will change behaviors.
Yes, sir.
Just one more for me.
Sure.
I was just curious, there have been a couple runs at board governance reform in the legislature since Wagner did his initial report a few years ago, and they haven't seemed to catch fire with the legislative leadership. Is there anything that you guys, any secret sauce that you are stirring into the mix this year that you think is going to kind of give it a little more momentum with leadership?
Yeah, the question was, has this been discussed with leadership? And then he asked if there was a secret sauce that goes in it. I would refer you back. I used to watch The West Wing a lot whenever I was a little kid, and that guy made a joke at the thing where he said, yeah, we have a secret plan to fight inflation, and it blew up. So I'm not going to tell you there's a secret sauce and make a joke out of it, but I'd share with you, I think that our leadership in the House of Representatives and our leadership in the Pennsylvania State Senate, if you look at what's transpired over the previous year, 2, 3 years, as well as the members. Leaders are elected by members, but our leadership team in both the House and the Senate are groups of people that are committed to transparency. They're committed to improving governance at state across the board. So I think that the leaders that we have in place, although I haven't talked to them specifically about this, my natural inclination would be that they're people that would be interested in at least engaging in the conversation. Sure.
I think over the last few years, when we're trying to pass funding in the dog days of June, maybe July for state-related, that has become a more and more difficult task. I think the deterioration of trust amongst the public, amongst members of the General Assembly, is a lot of the reason behind that deterioration of trust. And I think rather than take an antagonistic approach, what the three of us, and I think everyone that's up here today, is trying to do is to take a proactive step in restoring that trust, so that there is increased trust among the General Assembly, and I think that the difficulty of passing funding for state-related is what gives me hope that this will be finished before John and I give our farewell addresses at the end of the session. We are in unique times. We've had to deal with unique challenges, and I think restoring trust will go a long way in improving the discussions up on the House and Senate floor on funding our state-related universities.
Charlie Thompson, I'm going to tell you about the secret sauce. It's this simple. When I took on the Open Records mission back in my first full term, well-intended colleagues counseled me that it was impossible, that I could spend the rest of my career working on that one subject and there would be no progress. But they were wrong. Well-intended people counseled Representative Christiana that his notion for pen watch and school watch, so people could simply, in the comfort of their home or their car, pull information up on a website and see it. He was also told it's not going to happen, it's impossible. So we've got a couple of guys that have a good history, and I can tell you in short order, Representative Bernstine's established himself as a legislator who knows how to get things done. And I'm fairly optimistic that between the three of us, that we will find a path to get some great things accomplished. That's the secret sauce.
Thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up? I think we have time for one more if anybody else has one. Go ahead.
Just this just popped into my mind in
Sure.
that last set of answers. You guys do not. Are you guys comfortable with the basic template of the state-related university? Do you think it's time to change that?
Yeah, I think Yeah, thanks. It was a question with the slate of the state-related university. I'd share with you that that's, our focus is really on transparency measures as it deals with those, and then the governance of one particular, at this point in time, of one particular university. So, our goal, in my experience, which I've only been here a year and a half, but in working with esteemed colleagues like Representative Maher, Representative Christiana, we don't want to get off the rails. We want to be very specific and very focused on the things that are important and what's going to make sure that we're increasing transparency for taxpayers. I just finish up with this before we end. This is not, and just like Representative Christiana said, this isn't about punishment or this isn't about adversarial. This is about great collective effort and making sure that everyone can work together, come together, increase transparency for our state-related universities, improve governance for our state-related universities, and we look forward to working with every stakeholder that's involved in that process. Thank you so much.